Well, what an honor to speak with you all today. My name is Anurag Gupta. I'm the founder and CEO of Be More. And I spend most of my time researching the causes of racial bias and race-based disparities. And we use this research to create solutions to racial inequalities. But before I delve into my research, I really want to tell you how this Indian-looking guy became so committed to race reconciliation. So I spent my early childhood in India, and India doesn't have a concept of race, but there are certainly other ways of judging people. In 1991, I was in the second grade, and my neighborhood was under police curfew, and we couldn't leave our homes for almost a week because of Hindu-Muslim tensions hundreds of miles away. And I used to ask the elders around me, hey, what's going on? And they would say, well, those people are bad, violent, not like us, other. And a few months later, we went on vacation in eastern India, and my adults had told me to be careful of the locals. And I remember tugging at my uncle's leg, asking him why. Well, because they were Marxist. They weren't like us, they were other, they were violent, they were bad, you know the rest. And these explanations never sat well with me because it was contradictory to what I was conditioned to believe as a child. You see, every morning since I was 4 years old, I sang freedom songs about love, tolerance, peace, and religious equality with over 1,000 kids at our school assembly. So when I pushed adults to explain what made their humanity so fundamentally different from ours, they would say, oh, you're just too young to understand. You need to grow up. But these explanations pushed me further to learn about different human cultures, religions, and lands, until I came to one. I was 10 years old when I immigrated to New York City with my family, and I was so excited. You know, the land of opportunity, the city of dreams, the Empire State, the Big Apple. But within days, I became the object of ridicule. I was apparently someone who worshipped cows. I was apparently dirty, stupid, ugly, was bound to be a failure. And these descriptions were predetermined, prepackaged, and readily accepted before I even uttered a word, all based on the way I looked and the way I presented myself. So as a problem solver, I was like, I have to assimilate and become American, that is, become white as soon as possible. So I lost my accent, I changed the way I dressed, I didn't speak any Indian languages in public, and I even went by the name Andy. But deep down inside, I knew that I had to prove them wrong. And I wanted to use knowledge as my tool to show them that I was intelligent, I was capable, and I was smart, and thereby worthy of love and respect. And I excelled academically. I was the valedictorian of my high school. I graduated in the top 1% of my college class, won numerous awards, honors, and scholarships. And I took particular interest in American and global history, as well as human biology and genetics. And that's because my learning gave me appreciation for what I'd felt in my gut all along, that we're all part of the same exact human species. Regardless of what we look like on the outside, we have different cultures, ideologies, cosmologies, but our bodies and our minds work the same exact way. Yet, since high school, I had epithets like Bin Laden, Hindu, heathen directed at me. I spent a year in South Korea after college on a Fulbright, and I loved and I had an amazing time there. But I loathed meeting people for the first time because I had to spend 10 minutes convincing them that I was American. And just a few years ago, I was in my doctor's office, and another patient thought that it was suspicious that I was in the waiting area. So despite the honors, the awards, the degrees, these kinds of incidents kept on happening to me. And the worst part about it was that I couldn't express my feelings about them. In the communities I was in, particularly with people with a higher education, conversations about race and racial bias were unwelcome. You're overreacting. That's not what I heard her say. You're misunderstanding what he's saying. Why don't you think this way? Why don't you believe this way? Why don't you act this way? And the accumulation of these experiences made me feel disconnected from myself, from my peers, and from the country I called my own. And it made me sad to the extent that I didn't know who to turn to. As I entered law school, I had internalized all this stuff. My life got really dark. I had no energy. I didn't want to do anything that I used to love to do, like running, going to museums. And I just couldn't imagine this way, living this way. So 6 years ago, I found myself on the edge of my 18th floor window, contemplating jumping off. Excuse me. I've never shared this in public. And I didn't. I'm here. I didn't. And what happened to me when I was standing there looking below, that all of these projections that I'd felt as a man of color, as an immigrant, as a person of Indian descent, they were just stories. And they weren't true. And I didn't care for them anymore. I didn't care for any more awards, any more honors, any more degrees. I didn't care for keeping up with the Joneses. I didn't care for the rat race. What I cared about was my life and my liberation. And what I cared about was that I was given a second chance and I was going to live. And the more this experience became a realization, I saw that what kept me wounded and depressed and insecure for all these years was that people were not seeing me. People were not seeing Anurag. People were seeing ideas of me. And I chose to believe their ideas of me. And the more this became a felt experience, I saw that this was happening to my sister. This was happening to my mother. This was happening to my friends, my community members. This was happening to Oscar Grant and thousands of black men and women across the country. This happened to the Native man in South Dakota. It happened to Latino man in Washington. It happened to the Chinese American soldiers in the army. It happened to the Indian grandpa in Alabama. People are not seeing us. People are seeing ideas of us. It was as if I saw a demon, said Officer Darren Wilson to a majority white grand jury in Ferguson. People are not seeing us. They're seeing ideas of us. And I don't want to live in a world where we're living in ideas of one another. I want to live in a world where we live in the presence of one another. The real people. And that is why I started Be More. So Be More was conceived in 2012 after I completed a pretty extensive meta-study that identified the root causes of race-based disparities across life areas. And it is this work that brings me here to speak with you all. So my research revealed that academics and scholars have identified the root cause of every single race-based disparity in America. In other words, we know the who, what, where, when, and how, and why of every injustice and every inequality. Yet we still live in a country where over half of children of color, particularly Black, Latino, and Native children, attend high poverty schools compared to 7% of white children. That is 1 in 2 versus 1 in 14. 60 years after Brown v. Board, for full integration, 2/3 of Americans need to move neighborhoods. And on average, a Black man is sentenced 18 months longer than a white person for committing the exact same crime. And the median net worth of a Black, Latino, or a Native family is under $7,000 compared to $113,000 for a white family. But not only that, we as a collective tip Black waiters and waitresses 18% less. We as a collective tip Black taxi drivers 33% less. And for used cars, people of color are quoted prices that are hundreds of dollars more than what's quoted for white customers. Yet, these realities that are part of people of color's experiences are regularly denied. As if the indignities of the trauma of these experiences weren't enough, we are instead conditioned to believe that there's something wrong with you, that there's something wrong with people of color. You need to work harder. You have criminal tendency. You're just lazy. You're making a fuss out of nothing. There's something flawed with your humanity. There's something genetically deficient about you. Let me clarify this once and for all. There is no gene for race. There is no gene for race. Race is a story. It's made up. The story of race was invented and promoted by a small group of men of European and white American nobility from the 17th century onwards. Men like Linnaeus, Blumenbach, Cuvier, Camper, Louis Agassiz, and others. These men were so divorced from their humanity that they collected cabinets full of skulls, body parts, human genitalia. These men created a color-based human hierarchy that elevated light-skinned Europeans as the highest order of creation, ranking everybody else that didn't fit that based on their innate pathologies. This hierarchy is completely constructed, intentional, and false. But this story of European and white superiority was spread across the world through three ways: oppressive laws, apartheid, Jim Crow, segregation, anti-miscegenation, to this day to mass incarceration. Science, or pseudoscience, fake science, phrenology, physiognomy, craniology, eugenics, ethnography, to this day entering into the genomic sciences. And then mass entertainment, world fairs, minstrel shows, literature, Orientalist literature, to this day, to the precursors of Hollywood, film, music, song. All of us in this room, regardless of what we look like on the outside, are part of the same exact species. Yet, we are conditioned, our brains are conditioned to see one another through this story of stereotypes. Stereotypes invented by a few self-serving men. Stereotypes labeling people of color as lazy, unworthy, dangerous, not like us, a problem, vulnerable, and white people as heroes and the holders of human progress. And it is these stories and these perceptions that are the underlying cause of racial bias and racial inequality in our society. But the good news is that these perceptions are just a story. They're made up. And we can transform the story together. Regardless of whether you knew current realities or not, your presence here means that you believe that they're wrong, you feel that they're wrong, and you've committed your lives to change them. And you were the people who shed tears when Barack Obama was elected. Why? These were tears of healing, of generations of trauma, exclusion, and marginalization, as well as tears of hope, of joy, of possibility. Something had shifted in our humanity that we saw that we have overcome something. And despite the disappointment that's been these past 7 years, and let's not deny it, President Obama's color has a lot to do with those disappointments. You were still the people that showed up for Black Lives Matter. You lay on the concrete across college campuses, malls, courthouses, churches, city councils, trying to imagine what it was like to be Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Mike Brown, trying to imagine the irreparable suffering of our Black brothers and sisters. And you lay there to make known that it is not okay and it will not be done. It will not be done in your name. It will not be done in our name. And you're sick and tired of it. You're sick and tired of our media, our government officials, our government dehumanizing and devaluing Black lives. So by speaking up, we gave all those silent people the courage to speak up, to express their feelings, to be angry, to be shocked, and to know that they're not alone. This is something all of us are feeling, regardless of what we look like, and we got their backs. If I had known the story of race and the causes of inequality as a young person, I would not have spent all those years beating myself up. It is why this is why I founded Be More, because I want millions of young people around the world to know this story. I want them to know the statistics, and I want them to know our research to to have courage and strength in who they are. Black and brown people, indigenous and immigrant people, people living in fear, people living in the trance of their unworthiness, people living in the story of race. I spent a long time, most of my life, trying to run away from the truth of who I am. And I was hurting because that wasn't my truth. So founding Be More is part of my healing journey, to overcome the wounds of racial bias and to create solutions to transform those biases. Race, reconciliation, and courage. Many of you have been doing this work long before I was born. Heck, some of you even before my parents were born. And it is your commitment to justice, to freedom, to equality that has brought us this far. We have come at a time of our human evolution where we've surpassed the age of information. We are now living in the age of imagination. And all of us must reimagine our humanity for all people, for our planet Earth. Race, reconciliation, and courage. You are the courageous people to make this change. And that's why I believe you're the perfect ones to join Be More. And we need you really badly. Because we don't want to live in a country where a black person is killed every 28 hours. We don't want to participate in an economy that is built off of the exploitation of brown people at home and abroad. And because to us, Black lives matter, Latino lives matter, Native lives matter, Asian lives matter, Muslim lives matter, just as much as white lives. But most importantly, we don't want to live in a society where we're living in ideas of one another. We want to live in a society where we're living in the presence of one another. So with that, I just want to say that, Dr. King said, our goal is to create a beloved community. And this requires a qualitative shift in our souls as well as a quantitative shift in our lives. I propose that all of us in this room have the power to change this. And while we work for justice outside of us to transform our congregations, transform our institutions and our workplaces, we must also face and transform our own racial biases. And this is not just for white people, this is for all people. It has been shown that a majority of people of color have an automatic white preference. We must have the courage to rewire our brains, to move beyond the separation of us and them to just us. For me and for Be More, if only we can soften the barriers we have within, if we can end the war within ourselves, we can truly create a society where all people are welcome just as they are for who they are as they enter through that door. And Be More is creating trainings and interventions to make this reality. For me and for Be More, I welcome you to really support this, but also to be able to see that reality and make it your own. Thank you.